We're moving on to what would normally be the opinions segment of the show. But it feels like this segment should have a different title now because these are facts. So for today only, we're switching it to facts. And we're going to have our better do better incorporated in this so we can stretch our legs a little bit. We're going to talk about who is truly responsible for politically motivated attacks in this country. And the reason we're going to talk about this is because we've heard from the president and everyone, the vice president, you name it, everybody who's in power right now, where they'll put a camera in front of their face and a microphone. I've heard everyone say, it's the left that is radicalizing people. You can't call people Nazis and not expect, folks to try to attack them, on and on and on, pointing fingers at the left, suggesting that is the source of all the problems in terms of political attacks. And completely ignoring, it's like the they started it thing. You know what I mean? Like, who really set this whole country off? Donald Trump, since Donald Trump started becoming critical of Barack Obama in the White House and the birther movement, where he suggested to the country that Obama was an invalid president because he wasn't born in the United States, demanding to see his birth certificate, etc. This country has started on a path since that time of being increasingly divided. It's singular. And, people could point to Barack Obama all they want, but it was Donald Trump that took the faction that didn't want to see him in office and invested in it and played the greatest hits, white folks' greatest hits to that group. And has been successful in growing that movement. Or maybe not growing it. Maybe that movement already had the numbers and we just didn't know. But, giving validity, I suppose, to that movement and giving them a mouthpiece in this country. Now, this is the same Donald Trump, what we're talking about politically motivated attacks. This is the same Donald Trump that has been very, had very violent, incendiary speech. I could shoot in somebody and my followers, I wouldn't lose a follower. He's the one that organized the January 6th insurrection, hang Mike Pence, all that sort of stuff. That's Donald Trump. And his speeches and his ramblings are full of this type of rhetoric. So for this group of people to blame the left, it feels like what they do. You know what I mean? It's almost like if I say something enough times, it'll become true, even if it's not true, even if it's not scientific, even if it's not data-based, even if it's not journalistic, if it has no integrity whatsoever. If I just say it enough times, it becomes true. And we're going to talk later in the show about Donald Trump, in his own words, saying smart people don't like me, because smart people will not blindly accept something just because he says it. But there are enough people in this country that will accept things just because he says it. So he just says it over and over again. And then that's how it gets chronicled. That's the narrative that gets chronicled, right? So what they're doing now is saying over and over again, trans people, leftist rhetoric, etc. And this is the primordial ooze for these politically motivated attacks, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some data for folks that feel like they need to push back. Maybe you use this clip, maybe you use these talking points. Either way, if you end up in those circles talking to these people who are like, yeah, the left is so radical, miss me with that. The right is super radical, and Donald Trump is leading the charge. So this comes from Cato.org. For folks that are not familiar, I'll introduce you to Cato.org. For more than 40 years, this is from their website, by the way, for more than 40 years, Cato has led the charge for liberty in our nation and around the world. The Cato Institute is an assiduously nonpartisan and independent public policy research organization, or a think tank, that creates a presence for and promotes libertarian ideas in policy debates. Okay, so that's cato.org. You're welcome to look this up on your own. These are not the words of Ramses and Q. This is from an organization that tracks this stuff. Okay. Here we go. A total of 3,599 people have been murdered in politically motivated terrorist attacks in the United States from January 1, 1975 through September 10, 2025. Murders committed in terrorist attacks account for about 0.35% of all murders since 1975. Only 81 happened since 2020, accounting for 0.07% of all murders during that time, or 7 out of 10,000. Terrorism is the broadest reasonable definition of a politically motivated murder because it is the threatened or actual use of illegal force and violence by a non-state actor to attain political, economic, religious, or social goals through coercion, fear, or intimidation. That excludes individual hate crimes, which are frequently difficult to distinguish from terrorism, but are often more personal and spontaneous. 83% of those murdered since 1975 were killed by the 9/11 terrorists. And there's a chart, figure 1, okay? So that's 83% of the almost 3,600 right there, okay? 9/11. The Oklahoma City bombing accounts for about another 5%. Those murdered since 2020 account for just 2%. Terrorists inspired by Islamic ideology are responsible for 87% of those murdered in attacks on U.S. soil since 1975. And I want to be very responsible when I say that, okay? Because the Islamic terrorists that are responsible for those attacks are not representatives of Islam, the faith that more than 1 billion people on this planet practice. Islam is a faith of peace. It's like if people were to say Christianity is a faith of peace, but you took the KKK's version of Christianity to paint all Christians. That's not what we're doing with this data, okay? But this is call it an extreme right version of Islamic attacks. Okay, I'll continue. Since 1975. Okay, right wingers are the second most common motivating ideology, accounting for 391 murders and 11% of the total. The definition here of right-wing terrorists include those motivated by white supremacy, anti-abortion beliefs, involuntary celibacy or incels, and other right-wing ideologies. Okay? Now again, 11% of the total, right-wing. Left-wing terrorists murdered 65 people, or about 2% of the total. Okay, so we're going from 11% right wing, 2% left wing. Okay. Left wing terrorists include those motivated by black nationalism, anti-police sentiment, communism, socialism, animal rights, environmentalism, anti-white ideologies, and other left-wing ideologies. Those murders that are politically motivated by unknown or other ideologies are a vanishingly small percentage, which is unsurprising because terrorists typically want attention for their causes. So Q, I talked a lot and I want to give you as long a legs as you need. You got, a better part of 6 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever. Talk to me.
A better part of 6 minutes to talk about something that you said. And I'll keep saying what I'm saying. I know it's a lie, but I'll keep saying it until it's not. And then I'll say, I told you so. That very, very small percentage that you just talked about, when it ends up being someone who's left thinking, I'd bet money that in almost every case, it's retaliatory. You've just been stomping on me for so long that I had to hit back. And that takes me back to a time I was in college. I was at a party, strolling with the bros, and I ended up in a conversation with a really, really pretty young lady. Like, I stepped out of the line to speak to her. And as I was talking to her, a massive fight broke out. And how this is chronicled took for me to not be in that line and see who started the fire. Let's just say me and mine are the left and the other guys are the right. Now, one of my guys had a younger brother who was still in high school at this party with us. As you could imagine, all of us are on the football team. His younger brother is not. And he's in high school and we are grown men. And it looks like that if you're at the party. And someone on the right, for the sake of the story, punched him in the face. And it was unexpected. He could not defend himself. He was blindsided. But then a fight broke out. And for some reason, as I turned to kind of look around and see what was going on, I got hit in the back of the head and ended up on the bottom of this fight. And Ramses, I got stomped out. And I did my best to cover my face and my head. But if you're using your arms and elbows to cover your face and head, as you could imagine, everything else is exposed. And I'm being attacked, right, by the right, over and over and over and over and over. Eventually, however, I realize I'm getting beat down, but I have not been beat into submission. And I cannot lay here on the ground balled up forever because no one's coming to help. Apparently, no one thinks it's wrong that all of these guys are stomping me out right now. So I collected myself. There's an interesting thing that happens when you're getting jumped, or I guess in fights in general, but people fight to a rhythm. They throw kicks and punches in combination, and there's a timing to it. And after what was probably 2 minutes, but felt like 5 days of me being stomped out, I caught the rhythm of, of one of the guys. And I grabbed his Timberland boot and then his leg and snatched his leg from up under him. He fell very hard on the ground, and that gave me enough space to stand up. And Ramses, what do you think happened once I stood up?
Got out of there?
I was handcuffed by a police officer against the wall.
That sucks.
But I became the left wing respondent. I became the left thinking, quote unquote, terrorist. Because, right, we get called terrorists when it's us. When it's them, they're having a hard day and it's a mental health break and they just need prayers and forgiveness and grace and empathy. Right. So all that was me being oppressed, stepped on, having resources taken away from me, sought out because I looked different or thought different or loved different or prayed different. But when I finally said this is enough and retaliated, I was the only person being handcuffed. And that's how this often works. I don't know every case that data shows when the attacks come from the left, but we know it's overwhelmingly right. And I just be willing to bet that if some of those left thinking, quote unquote, terrorist were just tired of getting stomped out.
I want to make sure that it's stated clearly. 11% of the total comes from the right, 2% comes from the left. Okay. So by itself, that's a huge difference. So for folks out there, don't let them try to suggest that the left is doing this. Calling out Nazi behavior for what it is absolutely what you're supposed to do. This is not normal. Calling out that Nazi type behavior is normal. And yeah, I think your point is well made. If indeed there is something that, we're talking animal rights activists and stuff like that. So what are you going to do, right?